And we're live. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this virtual open day for Oxford University, and welcome to the English faculties. Welcome to Oxford at English. English at Oxford talk. It would help if I could get the words in the right order because words are quite important in our degree. I'm thankfully joined by people who are far better at words than I am. Two wonderful undergraduates, Katie and Megan, and by Adam Smith, who is going to be leading the talk. But I'll let them all introduce themselves and I'll keep quiet because words clearly aren't my strong point. So, Adam.
Great. Thanks, Alfie. My name's Adam, Professor Adam Smythe. I'm an English tutor at Balliol and in the English faculty here at Oxford. I'm also Director of Undergraduate Studies, which means I'm interested in and to some degree in charge with the undergraduate degree and how it runs and the papers and how it's taught. So I'm really pleased to be speaking with you today, and I'm going to try and give you an overview of the course that you will experience if you come here to Oxford, the kind of teaching that you'll experience, because teaching here is a little bit different in some ways to other universities, I think, and also the kind of papers or topics or modules, you might call them, that you'll do when you're here in your first, second and third years. And as Alfie said, we've got two brilliant undergraduates here. Katie, who's at the Queen's College in Oxford. You'll know that Oxford University is made up of lots and lots of smaller colleges. And so you have a kind of double life here as a student of your college existence and then your English faculty existence. Katie's at the Queen's College, and Megan, who's at Balliol. So I've worked with Megan a lot at Balliol College because that's where I teach. So I'll say a little bit about the course and then we'll pause and I'll ask Katie and Megan to say a little bit about their experiences of what it's like to be taught here, what seems to be interesting or particular. And hopefully that will give you a really good sense of what it's like to do English here. And then we'll have a little time at the end, I think, for questions, but I think there's lots of opportunities throughout the day for asking questions to tutors. So that's how we'll do it today. So I'm going to do that very 2021 thing of sharing a screen, which, hang on a sec. Let me see. And I think, is that working? Great. English at Oxford, that is studying English language and literature at Oxford University. I'll say a little bit about that. And at you can see a first slide here, lots of brilliant literary writers. And the figures across the top are all writers of plays and short and long fictions, novels and poetry who studied at Oxford and then have gone on to become brilliant writers themselves. You may know Oscar Wilde, looking magnificent, top left. Then Patience Agbaby, the next one, along with one of her brilliant books, then Monica Ali, and then Seamus Heaney, the great poet, and then Jeanette Winterson in the top right. Now, these are all people who have studied Oxford and then have gone on to become writers. And along the bottom row are people who didn't study at Oxford, but are literary names you'll very likely come across, or in some cases will definitely come across in the course of studying here. And you'll probably recognize some of them. On the left, you have Virginia Woolf, and then you have Geoffrey Chaucer drawn in the margins of an old manuscript there. We think that's probably what he looks like, but we're not quite sure. Shakespeare, you'll recognize. Emily Dickinson, maybe you'll recognize, the great American poet. Chinua Achebe, you may know who's next. And then lastly, Vladimir Nabokov, great playful, self-reflexive novelist, who again, you might come across in the course here. So that gives, I hope, a sense of range of the kind of authors you might encounter here at Oxford. I want to start with this slide now. What do people say about us? What's our reputation? We may like league tables, we may not like league tables, but we're doing well in a few league tables at the moment, which is very nice. The World University Rankings 2021, which sounds pretty total in its scope. English language and literature is for English, we're number one, which is good. You may have seen in the Guardian newspaper last week, they had a big supplement about universities, where to go, what to study, and lots of league tables. And the #1 university overall in that was Oxford. And the #1 English department in the country was also Oxford. So we really like the Guardian, at least for this week. So we're doing well on those league tables. That gives you, there's an interesting discussion to be had about league tables, but we're doing really well in those, which is great. Maybe we should put more stock on quotes from students who've recently come through. And here's a quote from our recent second year, which Katie or Meg may agree with or not, but we'll come to them in a moment. The best part about the English course in Oxford is the amazing teaching from one-on-one tutorials with experts to weekly seminars with other enthusiastic students and the dozens of optional lectures each week. The course really allows you to engage with literature in different ways. You feel like your work is cared about and you're given the support you need to reach your full potential. I'll talk in a little bit more detail about how the course is structured and how it's taught, but I think that final point is really important that Sarah makes in that quote there, and that is because teaching is often at quite a small scale at Oxford, sometimes 1-to-1 with tutors or 2-to-1, and not always and exclusively through huge lecture halls. There's an opportunity for the tutors to really get to know you as thinkers and as literary enthusiasts, and for you to really develop and express your intellectual personality. And I think we're really interested in tutors at that, in that, the way students develop interests and how we can mold the course to quite a large extent around the interests that particular students have. So I think that's that direct and kind of sensitive engagement between tutors and students is a real feature, I think. Okay, so there are some nice words about English at Oxford, and we think we're doing pretty well at the moment. What's it like? Well, here are some general features of the course. It's a really wide-ranging course. You study English literature from its beginnings. We can think about what that means exactly when we get onto the course, to the present day. So you cover a great historical range. You'll see that in the titles of the papers later on. This is a course that's committed to the idea of you having a really good sense of English literature throughout history, from Old English right up until the contemporary. And when you finish the course, you'll have a really, really good sense of how an 18th century early novel is like a late 20th century postmodern work of fiction, and how that's different from Chaucer's late 14th century poetry, and how that's different from Beowulf as an Old English poem, or Shakespeare, except you have a really good sense of how literature has shifted and changed and developed through time. I don't think you won't just have these kind of pockets of specialism with great holes, but a great sense of literature through time. There's a mix of core papers, that is papers that everyone does, and some specialisms, particularly in your final year. I'll say a little bit more about this in a moment, but in the last year you have a choice to choose particular papers that fit your interest. So it's a mix of papers that are compulsory and then optional stuff later on. The big kind of central feature is this tutorial system, which means, I'll say a bit more in a moment, but small scale teaching. That is, you and a tutor, or two or three of you and a tutor, rather than exclusively big groups. Exceptional teachers, we hope and we think. You'll be taught, if you come here, by tutors who are often a world specialist in the subject that they're talking about. And they've written the books, and they've edited the novels, and they've found the amazing manuscripts that now define what we're studying here. So that's really, really exciting. There's also a great range of tutors in terms of career stage. So there'll be some tutors who've just finished their PhDs, or even finishing their PhDs sometimes. And then you'll have more senior figures who've been teaching for kind of a long time and have written those big books. Oxford has an incredible library, the Bodleian Library. It's called the Bodleian because a man called Sir Thomas Bodley founded it in the early 17th century. The Bodleian Library, it's a copyright library, which means every book that is published in this country, a copy is sent to the library. So it has a kind of total coverage. And it also has amazing old books, rare books, going back centuries, and also manuscripts. And by manuscripts, we mean handwritten texts. So if you want to look at the manuscripts of, say, Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, or T.S. Eliot, who wrote The Wasteland, or R.S. Murdoch, for example, who wrote lots and lots of fascinating philosophical novels, their handwritten papers, diaries, notes, drafts are in the body, along with masses of other people too. So you have an incredible central library as a resource to help you. Each college also has its own excellent library as well. So for example, Katie's at the Queen's College, there's a beautiful old library there, full of both recent works and also kind of older stuff going back centuries. So there's really, really great library resources for you. And there's a rich, all of this kind of sits in a wider culture of extracurricular literary stuff, which isn't formally part of the course, but because the university is full of ambitious, clever, talented literary people, there are masses of things going on, like play reading and drama and creative writing and debating and kind of philosophical discussion about literature. There are lots and lots of almost infinite other activities you can be involved with. So if you like that sense of, I want to do plays, I want to write plays and put them on, I want to be in a play, or I want to be involved in a literary magazine. There's a great new literary magazine called the Oxford Review of Books, which is edited by students and written by students, but has some backing as well from outside, so it's like a professional literary paper. And there are lots of things like that. So there's a massive other stuff going on which you can be involved with. Okay, how will I be taught? I'll say a little bit about here, and then I might ask Katie and Megan to say a few words about how the experience of how you are taught at Oxford, what it's like. So there are really 3 different modes for teaching, and the most important one, I think, is the tutorial, which I've mentioned already before. And that happens in your college. And the way a tutorial works is that you'll be set an essay topic, typically, and you'll have about a week to write an essay, and you hand that into your college tutor. So for Balliol and Meg, that would be me. And then I would read it and mark it. And then we would have an hour-long tutorial, which is a discussion about that essay with either 1 student or maybe 2 students. And we'd start by talking about your essay, and we'd say, I'd say, I really like this bit, and this bit you need to think a little bit about, or what on earth are you trying to say here? And then we'll try and widen that discussion to take in the topic more generally. So Meg might have written an excellent essay on, trying to think of your Shakespeare, blushing and Venus and Adonis. That was one, wasn't it? Meg? And then so we'll start talking about Shakespeare's great poem, Venus and Adonis, and blushing and skin. And then we might try and widen it to think about issues of, say, gender or race or power in Shakespeare's writing more generally, for example. So that's a tutorial based around the essay you write, and then a quite focused but also expanding discussion. There are also classes, which are a bit like a small A-levels group. I guess there's normally 8 or 9 students. You're given reading in advance. We all go into a kind of teaching room or a large office, and then we talk about the reading that's been set. A few, maybe a couple of novels and some criticism. Sometimes students might be asked to do small presentations. The nice thing about those classes is that they usually happen within your college year group. And that's quite a small group of students who you get to know really, really well. So it becomes, we hope, a quite informal but ambitious way of being taught. So tutorials, and then classes are a bit bigger. And then there are lectures as well, which take place in the English faculty. And they're the kind of thing you can imagine. They're a tutor, professor standing at the front, talking to you, a group of maybe 100, about a particular topic. And there is an opportunity for some engagement and some questions, but it's a bit more for tutor speaking to a big group. Unusually, and I think this is really important to stress this, lectures are not compulsory. There's not a class list, there's not a register you have to sign into. It's not a specific kind of test attached to the lectures. It's up to you, guided by your tutor, to attend those lectures. So your tutor might say, well, you're doing the Victorian paper this term, so these are some really great lectures that are going on at these times. I really think you should attend them. And then it's up to you to attend them, and it's up to you to take the notes you think that are important. It's also up to you to join those up with the tutorial and seminar work you're doing in college. And I think that's important because students are treated as adults in this culture, I think, not infantilized, not told, go here, think this, regurgitate this point. There's a more grown-up relationship to learning, I think, and that's reflected in how the lectures are richly available, but then the students have to engage with them themselves. Independent research with access to unparalleled resources. Well, I've mentioned the library as this great resource. There's a chance to do your own research and develop your own topics. There's a good amount of contact hours with tutors, and crucially, I think, just to repeat, the scale is often really, really small. In other words, there's a tutor and one of you, or a tutor and two students, and you're having a conversation. You can get a long way, I think, at that scale, in a way you can't at a much larger group. Okay. So that's a little bit about how you will be taught if you come here. Let me just turn to Katie and Megan briefly. If you've got any observations or thoughts about what would you tell a sixth former, for example, who's thinking about coming here, about the teaching here and how it works and how it's perhaps different from what you do at A-level or school. Katie, maybe we could start with you.
Sure, yeah. I think the main thing is that obviously you have to be very self-motivated to choose the lectures, to attend the lectures, to write the notes that you want to write. So that choice is great, but you have to, want to have that choice and be committed to that choice. But the thing about tutorials that Adam just mentioned there is, I think the thing that I realised really early on was how much progress you do make in those tutorials. If you're sat one-to-one for an hour with a tutor, your whole mindset or your whole opinion on something can be changed or developed. And I think that is such an amazing way to be taught. And I think that is obviously the most valuable thing about the teaching here at Oxford. But yeah, I think tutorials are great, and they can be a little nerve-wracking, I guess, to begin with, thinking that you're going to be sat with someone who, again, like Adam said, was a world expert in their subject. That is scary to sit down with your work and have them look at it, but at the end of the day, what you come out with is amazing. So much feedback and so much progress made in such a short amount of time. So yeah, I think the tutorials are really great.
Thanks, Katie. That's really helpful. I think, that stress on self-motivation is really important because, we have high expectations of all our undergraduates here, and we want them to do well, and that they would do well. And we really value students who have a love for literature, who want to read, and also want to read new stuff. Like, you'll come in having done a certain amount of reading. Lots of you will have read, 1984 and Margaret Atwood and a bit of Dickens and maybe a bit of Shakespeare. For example, but we want you to not simply read that stuff over and over again, but to read new stuff. You'll never have done probably any Old English. You probably won't have read Beowulf, but we want you to be excited by that prospect of the newness of it, and that's really, really important, I think. Okay, Meg.
I think to echo that thing about the tutorials, I've noticed just from starting in first year to getting where I'm now, just about to go into finals, just like how much I've progressed and how much more confident I am at trying to go for sort of more, exciting ideas, or maybe ideas that you would have been scared to pursue before. So I think that's the first thing. And then the other thing about the classes with the seminars is, like, I've started with a group where we all tackled like Old English, which was really alien to all of us. And so now when we do, let's say, a romantics paper in second year, everyone's much more sort of engaged with each other, and everyone feels very comfortable with each other. So it's a great learning environment, because I think we all want each other to do well. And I think that's a really nice part of the collegiate system, is that there's this like group that always all kind of bringing each other up. So you've got this little sort of gang that wants you to sort of pursue all your literary ideas as well alongside you, which I think is really lovely.
I think that's so true, Megan. I've noticed that, particularly with finalists when it comes around to revision, and often at Bailey, I've noticed they have a kind of group chat or some online thing where they're sharing readings or looking at each other's essays, and that's really having that 8 or 9 kind of fellow students is really, really, really helpful, I think. Okay, great, thanks. That's really, really helpful. I'll come back to you again in a second. So I'd give you a quick look at the shape of the course. The first year, looks like this, in that you have 4 papers, 3 organized chronologically, and then number one, Introduction to English Language and Literature. And that number 1 paper, which doesn't have an exam, but a portfolio submission, in other words, you do some written essays for it, has 2 parts. There's a part about language, which is an investigation of how language works. You might, for example, look at how metaphors work, or you might look at how language is influenced by social class, say, or ethnicity, or gender. You might look at topics like dialect, say, or persuasive language in advertising or rhetoric. So it's a study of how language has developed and how language works. That's part 1. The other part of that paper 1 is literary theory, which some of you will know, I think, from your A-level work, which is really about asking the big questions about literature. Why is the canon like it is? Why do we value these texts over others? How do we assess the merit or worth or value of one literary text against another? How important is the author, for example, or the historical context for shaping the meaning of a text? Or is it always up for grabs in the present? How much of a present day political influence should the study of literature have, for example? Can it do good in the world now, right now, even if you're studying texts from the 14th century or the 16th century? So these kind of big, exciting theoretical questions are a part of that paper too. Paper number 1, that paper as well. So papers 2, 3, and 4 are chronological papers. Number 2 is the one Meg was just referring to, the initially perhaps slightly intimidating Old English paper and early medieval, which is new to everyone. No one, I think I can say this definitively, no one comes in with much experience with literary text at this period. So it's starting from scratch for everyone, and that's really, really exciting. Papers 2 and 3 and 4 cover periods that you'll have read some literature from this period already, 1830 to 1910, and then 1910 to the present. One thing I'll say about this before moving on to the final structure is that there aren't, for papers 3 and 4, there aren't set texts that everyone has to study. And there isn't a set syllabus in advance. That's up to the tutor at each college to construct themselves, and often to construct in dialogue with the students. So if you have if you're a student and you have a particular interest in, for example, representations of the city in the 19th century, for example, then you could tell your tutor, and they might be able to develop an essay or a class if others share that interest around that particular topic. Now, the tutors will, of course, give you things to read if you don't come forward with those ideas, but there is a sense, because we're not locked in to a particular canon of texts. We have these period markers, but within that we can work with anything we want. And that can mean very literary, or it can mean less literary. We're interested in texts in the widest sense. So there is that mobility to the course, which I think is really, really exciting. It means we can respond to changes in the discipline really, really quickly. So that's great. Okay, so that's all the first year. That's what you're doing the first year. Final honours school, which sounds a bit of a mouthful. It just means the exams, the stuff at the end, the finals that you'll take, has 7 papers, 4 of them ranging in order from 1350 through to 1830. So roughly we might say a kind of medieval or late medieval paper, and then a Renaissance or early modern paper, and then a kind of restoration paper, and then a romantics paper. Although we would immediately want to start thinking critically about those terms and what they mean and the problems they bring in. But that you'll have that wonderful spine of literary papers. And then you'll have three papers where you have a lot of choice in how you take things. The Shakespeare paper, which isn't an exam, but it's a portfolio, so it's coursework that you produce. And you produced in the end 3 essays on topics of your choosing in consultation with your tutor. So there's a great range of stuff you can do here. You can do stuff about performance or the text or Shakespeare's context, or you can do about present day adaptations, or you can do about Victorian Shakespeare, or you can do about rehearsals, or anything that seems plausible and sensible and practical can be done under that Shakespeare title. It's about developing your own particular interests in this big topic. Paper 6 is a set of classes organized around topics, and I'll show you a list of those in a second. And paper 7 is a dissertation, which comes at the end of your course. And again, that's wide open in terms of what you want to choose. The idea is that you can work on anything that's plausible and that can be supervised by a member of the faculty here in the English department. Because we have many, many people here and a wide range of specialisms, we can pretty much cover everything here. But that's a really exciting moment when it goes well, because you might become a real authority on the topic that you are choosing, knowing maybe more about it than anyone, if you chose a particular focused topic and work on it really, really well. So for your finals, as you see at the bottom of the page, is a mix of coursework, essays, and then 4 exams as well. So a combination of ways of being assessed. I talked about that paper 6 option in your 3rd year. And there's a large list, about 20, 25 or so choices that are circulated, and students can choose what they want. We try to ensure that as many as possible get their first or certainly their second choice. Mostly that works out. And this is just a list of an example of the kind of topics that you might be able to choose in this paper 6 seminar. American novel after 1945, film criticism, it's always really popular, post-colonial literature, Oscar Wilde, J.M. Coetzee, South African writer, writing feminisms, visual and material culture in late medieval literature. There's a wide range of papers by period, by historical period, but also by kinds of text. In other words, you can do film as well as you can do more traditional literary text, and also by approaches and by methods and theoretical models. So we hope that by the 3rd year, you've got a strong sense of the kind of literary thinker you are, of the kind of work you like to do, the kind of work that's exciting for you to do. You can find something that fits that. And then I'm going to ask Katie and Meg one more question in a moment, but this is just an example of the dissertations that have been done recently. Again, anything we can supervise and is sensible and is going to enable you to show your capacities is possible for a dissertation. And you can see there the kind of stuff that has been done in the past. John Donne and cosmology, 21st century theatre and censorship, the post-colonial Nigerian novel, Renaissance recipe books. In other words, you don't have to have big canonical literary works. You can talk about texts that are perhaps at the edges of what we would consider literary. Shakespeare in prison and prisons in Shakespeare. How has Shakespeare performed in prisons and how has he worked there? T.S. Eliot, ghosts and haunting in Ali Smith's novels. Modern global responses to the Canterbury Tales. That was exciting, how the Canterbury Tales have been received and rewritten and adapted in countries all over the world. Over the centuries. Sarah Waters and Neo-Victorianism, standardization in the Scots language. So there's a great range of stuff for you to do there. Okay, Katie and Meg, you said a little bit about the teaching here. I wonder if you could you say something about the kind of range of papers that you've done so far, whether it was kind of stuff that was new to you or whether you were familiar with it. Katie, could you say something about what you've studied and what you've enjoyed here on the papers you've done so far?
Yeah, sure. I think the key thing that, like Adam said, obviously we have a great spine of the chronological all the way through, which is fantastic, but that's interesting. But it's also really useful and helpful for each paper to know what kind of came before it and what came after it. You know, that is a useful thing and an interesting thing as well. It's not just there for the sake of it. It's really helpful to learn in that way. And of course, again, there's a whole range of things that were familiar and were exciting to explore in such great depth. So, you know, paper 3 prelims for me was one of those things where I'd studied a lot of it at A-level, but having the resources and the libraries that Oxford does means that I could explore it in so much more depth, which was so interesting. And then obviously there's things like paper 2 prelims, so Old English, something completely unfamiliar to me and alien, like Megan said earlier. But again, the resources, and again, emphasize what Megan said, the class sessions for that, working together as a group, really helped to work through those difficult ideas and those tricky topics. But yeah, I think paper 3 is one of my favourites for prelims, so Victorian stuff. And again, the resources at Oxford, whatever you're interested in, whichever paper that you have a particular liking for, you'll be able to study it in so much depth and detail because of the resources here. So yeah, all really good.
Thanks, Katie. That's great. Meg, is there anything you wanted to say about the papers you've done and what you enjoyed?
Yeah, I mean, I think also it's reiterating that it is great that you sort of start in prelims with learning that Old English, because that's helped me so much with language. So things that may feel sort of completely daunting, perhaps right now, maybe Chaucer's quite hard to read. Actually, once you've learned the Old English, Chaucer becomes a lot easier to tackle. And then I think it therefore becomes like a fun literary pursuit, as opposed to sort of needing to sort of swim your way through the language. You're sort of really engaging with the other aspects of it, and sort of analysing it a lot quicker. And I think that's really enjoyable. And then, as Adam said, I think getting to final year and you've had your 2 years of progress, and you've got this option to do Shakespeare and special options in your dissertation, where you can follow your own niches in your own way. I think that's great. Like, I was so excited when I got my special option through. I think it just shows how much you've progressed when you really know what you want to study. I think it's that's really cool.
And which one are you going to be doing, Meg?
I'm doing dream literatures and dream culture. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. You must tell me about that.
I will do.
Okay, thanks so much. So a couple of other things to note. And I won't say about too much detail on this now, but it's possible to take what's called course 2, which is this really exciting version of the course, which is particularly attentive to the older period stuff. So if you particularly love the medieval and the Old English, and in particular, if you like the idea of manuscript study and the history of language, then there's a version of the course that's focused on that in particular. So you do slightly less of the later period stuff and slightly more of the early period stuff. And we always have lots of students who are sometimes, to their own surprise, because they come in knowing much more about the Victorian, say, or the 20th century, they get really interested in that period, and they can have a version of the course that caters to that, and that's really, really popular. The other thing to note is that you can include literature in translation, that is literature that was originally in other languages that's been translated into English, and that can be part of what you talk about. So that's if you come in with an interest in other languages, that's something you can express in your work you do here, particularly I think in the dissertation. If you're interested in French stuff or Italian stuff, we can find a way of combining that into your dissertation in really exciting ways. We also offer, as lots of you will know, joint degrees. I've been talking about the English degree, but there are joint degrees with classics, modern languages, and history. And it's roughly the case that you do half and half and join them together. And we have lots of students who do all those joint degrees. But that's a way to proceed too if you have interests in those topics. Program outcomes, which is that kind of ugly phrase, isn't it? But you know what I mean. What do you get out of it? How are you richer, better, more profound as a result of doing English? Well, you are better at understanding literary texts, analysing literary texts, thinking about how to approach those literary texts. You're good at making judgments and thinking about how you are thinking. You become more self-reflexive as a thinker. I think that's important. You become more analytical. At its heart, I think the study of literary text is about being given a piece of text and reading it closely and developing an argument about how that text works, its logic, how it creates the effects it does. And if you get very good at that, and that's a profound skill you can apply to any kind of writing. It doesn't have to be the poetry of Chaucer. It can be a newspaper or a TV program or a business report. The ability to be analytical with language like that, which is the kind of core skill you're working on throughout the 3-year degrees. That's really, really important, and you'll get extremely good at that. You become a good speaker. That's partly through tutorials where you're talking with your subject specialist. And as Katie said, at first that can be absolutely intimidating, but hopefully soon it becomes a more fluent exchange, and you might be doing presentations in classes, for example. So you'll get better at talking and being persuasive in language. And then in terms of what students go on to do, there's a wide range of careers that students pursue: law, journalism, charity sector, civil service, TV, BBC, advertising, teaching, academia, of course. Staying on, you can become tutor doing it, financial sector, creative writing, theatre, publishing, and lots and lots more, I think. And I guess English language and literature is not vocational in a literal sense, in the way kind of business studies is vocational, or tourism studies is vocational, say. But I think it's in some ways more kind of profoundly applicable, and you're developing these skills which are really, really important and really, really valued by employers, I think. And that puts you in a great position for doing a wide range of jobs after university. There's a really great career service here at the university. You can actually access the career service even after you've left, if you've been a student here, and there are lots of careers fairs and meetings with experts there, and they're very good at setting up internships and helping you decide what you want to do after. So that's a big part of the university experience here, I think. And here are just some beautiful barrage of badges of companies that our students have had internships with as a result of the careers service. You can see there's lots of different stuff going on there. And that's back to my first slide about English at Oxford. So I hope that's given you a sense of what it's like to study here. I think it's a really wonderful course, and by the end of it, you are kind of profound literary thinkers, we hope, and you will have read an awful lot of works from all kinds of traditions and in all kinds of styles and all kinds of registers. But I think most fundamentally, and Katie and Meg have brought this out really brilliantly, I think if you're passionate about literature, if you're excited about the idea of reading a load of poems by an author you've never heard of in a period you don't know, if that's a compelling thought, then that's really great. And that's the kind of relationship to literature that we want you to have, and you will flourish here, I think, if that's your attitude. Okay, Katie, Meg, is there anything else you wanted to add at the end there? There needn't be, because you've said great things already, but is there anything else you want to add?
I think just
no, not really. Just emphasize again how much I enjoy. Oh, sorry, Meg, go on. Oh,
no, I was just going to say also, just with the tutorial system, it's also great because just from like a pastoral side, you also have someone that knows you quite well, which I think is like nice on that level. And it's just a college thing again, is that you've really got someone to touch base with academically, but also, just to make sure you're actually doing well in yourself across uni, because uni is obviously an intense time, and I think that's a great thing as well, because you're sort of supported on all levels. So I think that's another good thing about Oxford.
Yeah, thanks, Meg. Yes, that scale is really crucial, I think. Okay, Alfie, I think we're done. I don't know if it's appropriate to have questions now. We're going to save those for later on in the day.
If anybody would like to ask quickly a question of Adam or of Katie and Meg, then pop a question in the YouTube comments. We have about 5 minutes left. I think quickly, just to pick up on what Meg said about colleges and the pastoral element, I think it's worth knowing, and I will be answering a lot of questions about this today, I'm sure, that when it comes to your UCAS application, we're not asking you to choose a college per se, but to put down a college preference. And a good way to suss out which college you might prefer to be at is to go on their websites, or today, looking through the virtual offerings, look at all the colleges, and maybe have a look at some of the English tutors who are assigned to those colleges and see if what they're interested in marries with what you're interested in. And if you think that's so, then note down that college as a preference. It isn't guaranteed that you might get offered a place at that college. And ultimately, I think everybody ends up loving whatever college they get. I mean, Katie and Meg, did you both apply to your direct college, or were you pooled there?
But yeah, I applied directly to Queen's, so I kind of loved it from the get-go. But I mean, yeah, all the colleges are great, and you know they all have exactly the same kind of resources, libraries, and tutors. So yeah, there's no bad option at all.
Not at all. And Meg?
I was actually pooled, so it just
wonderful.
because I've had the best time at Balliol and wouldn't have wanted to go somewhere else. So it just shows the college system, it all works out.
It does. It certainly does. Adam, I'd be interested to know how you find collegiate teaching, whether there's a great difference, you think, between departmental lecturing and whatnot.
Well, I mean, the big difference, of course, as Meg was saying, is that you can really get to know your college cohort. You know, in a couple of weeks, for example, at Balliol, the new first years will arrive, and this will happen at Queen's College too, and all the college, and there's kind of welcome events, and there's kind of dinners, and there's introductions, and you remember these students who you saw perhaps at interview, and then you teach them, you know, across the next 3 years. So there's a wonderful sense of getting to know them well, and that can mean that you can see how they develop intellectually and kind of mold the teaching to fit them. But as Meg says, it can also mean that you can look out for them or be available for contact if anyone's going through a difficult time, and that's really, really important too. So I think the college teaching is defined by that sense of kind of proximity and intimacy, I think, which is quite unusual in a university these days, and really important, I think.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you. We've got a couple of comments which we've just got time to answer. Firstly, what does current learning look like? Is it a blended learning mode, or is it slowly coming back to in-person? So I can answer that. Currently, it is blended in that online lectures are still available and will continue to be available throughout the year. But due to the flexibility inherent in the tutorial system, we are able to have in-person tutorials, one-to-one or in small groups. So there's definitely stuff happening in person in Oxford, and you will be taught face-to-face. I think that seminars, slightly larger groups of undergraduates, may still be online, but that's yet to be confirmed, I believe. And the other one, which is more of an application question, but I'll leave that for later, because I think it's interesting to apply it to teaching in general at Oxford, is talking about different art forms. So can you look at films and how they relate to literature? Adam, do you have a response to that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if we realize that we're studying texts in this degree, and we can think of a text in quite expansive terms, it could be a novel or a poem or a historical document, or it could be a film, or it could even be an artwork, then that's definitely the case. And if you're particularly interested in interdisciplinary approaches to thinking about literature, that is, if you want to write about the Victorian novel and its relationship to art at the time, or if you want to think about Virginia Woolf and music, or Shakespeare and theatrical performance, these are all possibilities, absolutely. The scope for bringing those in fact, it's actively encouraged. Those third year paper 6 options often have film or art options that are available, but you can bring that in all the time through your the work you do in all the other papers too. It's a good example of how, if you're really passionate about, say, photography, and you want to write about modernism and early photography, which is a great topic, and then you could say that to your tutor, and a subject, an essay could be molded around that, definitely.
Yeah, and I think just picking up finally on that idea of scope and breadth of what you can really delve into here at Oxford. So I'm aware that someone is currently writing their dissertation on gender in video game cutscenes, and is looking at the scripts in cutscenes as the literary basis to examine gender roles in, I think, such games as Mass Effect and other really new stuff. So you really can do literature up to the present day and from its English origins, as it were. So yeah, please, if you're watching, come back at midday for Professor Emma Smith's lecture on Shakespeare. Keep asking us questions on Slido. Myself and the tutors will be active throughout the day doing that. And I hope you have all a really good day. And thank you massively to Meg and Katie and to Adam for a wonderful talk and some very illuminating comments. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And thanks to everyone out there for coming along, and hope to see you next year, the year after. That would be great.
Okay, and we're done. Thank you, guys.